Hi, this is Synthchaser from Synthchaser.com. Today I'm going to give you a functional demonstration of the Moog Micromoog. The Micromoog is my favorite of the single oscillator vintage Moogs, and hopefully by the end of the video you'll be able to see why. To prevent potential disappointment, please watch this video knowing this is a functional demo with sounds and talk explaining those sounds, but no cool playing. There's plenty of videos out there of people with far greater musical talent than myself playing on their Micromoogs. This video is to explain what they can do and what they can sound like. Let's start off by looking at the oscillator. There's a single oscillator and you can set its octave range with the octave selector switch here on the top left. This is the lowest the VCO goes, low F of the 32-foot range. This is the 16-foot range. 8-foot, 4-foot, and 2-foot. And that's the highest the Micromoog's VCO goes. There's a fine-tune knob for the oscillator, and it's actually located on the back of the synthesizer and has a fairly limited range. So you can see the fine-tune knob would be impractical if you wanted to transpose your keyboard. So they have a frequency knob here next to the octave selection switch. Notice that the frequency knob doesn't work if you've selected one of the numbered octave ranges. To use this knob, you need to turn the octave selection switch to the wide setting. Then this frequency knob can be used to set your bass frequency over a very wide range of frequencies. The wave shape of your oscillator is set with a wave shape knob. With the knob all the way counterclockwise, we start out with a sawtooth waveform. As we start to turn this knob, the sawtooth wave starts turning into a square wave until we get a perfect 50% duty cycle. If we continue to turn the pot clockwise, the square wave narrows to a narrow pulse. This is a pretty creative alternative to the fixed wave shape options on most synthesizers, like say the Mini Moog. This becomes even more fun with wave shape modulation, which we'll get to later. While the Micromoog is a single oscillator synthesizer, you can beef up the sound with the -1 or -2 octave sub-oscillator. Moog called the sub-oscillator doubling. With the doubling pot at 12 o'clock like it is now, the sub-oscillator is off. As you turn the pot to the left, you're mixing in the -1 octave sub-oscillator. If you turn the pot to the right, you'll be mixing in a -2 octave sub-oscillator. The sub-oscillator is a fixed square wave. You can't change or modulate the shape of the sub-oscillator. There's a slide switch labeled oscillator with 3 settings: normal, drone, and off. Up to this point I've had the switch in the normal mode, which means the oscillator is on and controlled by the keyboard. The drone setting disconnects the oscillator from the keyboard. As you can see, no matter what key I press, the frequency is the same. When you're in drone mode, the oscillator is roughly at the base frequency for the octave switch you've selected. For the numbered octave switches, that's the low F key. So here's the 32-foot octave, 16-foot, 8-foot, 4-foot, 2-foot. On the wide setting, the bass frequency is controlled by the frequency pot. Finally, there's the off setting. And this cuts the VCO from the VCF. The oscillator is still running, and I'll show you later why that could be useful even when it's not in the audio mix. A reason why you might want to turn the oscillator off with this switch is because you can use the self-oscillating filter as a sine wave oscillator, and I'll show you how to do that in the filter section of our tour. There's a sort of random noise source in the Micromoog. Why sort of random? Because the noise is generated by a 5837 noise IC chip, which actually produces noise with a repeating pattern. It's unfortunate that this method was used in a lot of models of Moogs because the result is noticeably inferior to generating noise with a transistor or a Zener diode. Regardless, you can mix this noise in with your oscillator with this knob. There's no level control for the oscillator, just the noise. So if you want just a noise source, you need to use the oscillator off switch. Let's take a little detour over to the VCA and its envelope generator. On the Micromoog, the VCA is called loudness, and envelopes are called contour. Here in the upper right, we have the two loudness contour controls. One pot for attack and one pot for release. Here I'll try different values of attack, starting with very short. Going to very long, like on the order of 10 seconds. Here I'll try different values of release, from very short to very long, also on the order of 10 seconds. So that's two knobs, and it seems like a really limited envelope, but there are some switches that affect the functionality of the contour generator. The release slide switch allows you to switch between a contour with a release time and one with no release time. This begs the question, why have this switch at all? Can't you just turn the release pot to minimum and achieve the same thing? And the answer is sort of, but not really. Even with this pot at its minimum release, there's still a millisecond or couple millisecond release time. When you have the release switch in the right position, the pot is bypassed and you get a snappier shutoff on your envelope. Although personally, it's very hard for me to hear. The loudness sustain switch allows you to choose between a contour that either sustains while you hold a key or doesn't. Through now we've had the switch to the left, or sustain on position. While I hold a key, the attack portion of the envelope happens. Then the envelope is held at max until I let go of all the keys. Then the release portion of the envelope happens. When I turn the switch to the right, or sustain off position, as soon as the attack time runs its course, the release portion of the envelope will occur. Dare I use this word, but this is how you can get a note to decay while you're holding a key. Now I'll turn the release up a little bit, and you'll notice that once we get to the release portion of the envelope, it doesn't matter whether or not I release the key. That's because I have the release switch set to on. If the release switch is set to off, now when I release the key, it's going to close up the envelope in the middle of its release time. The bypass switch was misnamed to dumb things down for us synthesizer users. Its function is to bypass the VCA and always have the output of the filter at the audio output. But it's not actually bypassing the VCA, rather just sending in the maximum control voltage to the VCA to keep it wide open. This is equivalent to the VCA gain control on the ARP 2600 in Odyssey, but only with on-off modes. Am I splitting hairs by pointing this out, or does the VCA of a synth really have no effect on the sound? The volume knob is a master volume control that attenuates the output of the VCA. It's not a VCA control. And we're listening now to an amp that's plugged into the low output jack on the back of the synthesizer. There's also a high output jack. The Micromoog is packing the legendary Moog ladder filter. So far we've been listening to the synthesizer with the cutoff knob turned fully clockwise, which keeps the filter fully open. As we turn the cutoff frequency knob counterclockwise, we're going to lower the cutoff frequency and strip the harmonics away from our oscillator. We can keep lowering the cutoff frequency and filter away the entire signal. The emphasis control is the resonance control. Why does Moog call it emphasis instead of resonance? It creates a Q factor around the cutoff frequency of the filter, which effectively emphasizes that frequency. Here I'll sweep the cutoff frequency at increasing emphasis values, starting with none. Separate from the loudness contour generator, there's a filter contour generator. This has the same attack and release controls as the loudness contour generator, and it works the same way. When we apply the filter contour, it's like that envelope is an invisible hand turning the cutoff frequency knob. To apply this envelope to control the VCF, we use the filter contour amount pot. Thus far we've had this pot in the 12 o'clock position, which does not apply the contour to the filter control. The further we turn this pot clockwise, the deeper we apply the filter contour envelope. So let's close up the filter a little bit and add some emphasis, and let's set up a filter envelope with some attack and some release, and then let's give some release to the VCA, the loudness contour, as well. So that's our note with no contour, filter contour applied. Now let's start applying filter contour. If instead of turning the knob clockwise past 12 o'clock, we turn the contour amount counterclockwise, we'll be applying an inverted contour envelope of increasing depth. So instead of opening the filter, we'll be closing the filter. Here's the filter with no contour amount applied, and here it is with inverted contour amount. Like with the loudness sustain, there's a slide switch that lets you turn off the sustain portion of the filter contour envelope. We've been listening with the sustain on. Now I'll switch the sustain off, and you could hear that the filter closes up even though I didn't release the key. You can mix and match the filter sustain and loudness sustain settings. You may not have thought anything of it when I sweep the filter earlier, but I turned the resonance all the way up to maximum. And the filter didn't self-oscillate. But isn't that one of the cool things about the Moog ladder filter, the ability to self-oscillate? Well, you can still do it with the Micromoog. That's where this filter mode switch comes into play. With this switch you can choose between normal, full, and tone modes. We've been in normal mode throughout the video so far, and on a properly calibrated Micromoog, the filter will not break out into self-oscillation in normal or full modes. To get it to do that, you switch to the tone mode. In tone mode, the emphasis pot is bypassed, and you're granted access to its secret level 11 setting, where the filter self-oscillates. Now you can adjust the cutoff frequency to tune the filter, and you can use the keyboard to play the filter as a sine wave oscillator. In normal and full modes, the keyboard control voltage is applied as a VCF control. Normal mode applies 1/2 volt of control voltage per octave, and full mode applies 1 volt of control voltage per octave. Here we are in normal mode. And in full mode, you can hear that the lower notes are not as bright as the upper notes. Earlier I mentioned that the oscillator could be useful even when it's cut off from the audio output. This filter mod by oscillator switch lets you do exactly what the name implies. Let's turn the oscillator off and put the filter in tone mode. Now when I turn this switch to weak or strong, I'll be using the oscillator to modulate the cutoff frequency, or in this case the audio frequency of the filter. And the pitch of the oscillator affects the sound that we'll hear. So you can hear that gives us some crazy ring modulator-like sounds. I don't need to have the oscillator out of the audio mix to take advantage of this filter modulation. The glide control lets you glide from one note to another instead of stepping to that note. With the control fully counterclockwise, there's no glide. And as I turn the knob clockwise, you can hear increasing glide times. The Micromoog has some reasonably flexible modulation source and routing options. The modulation controller is the mod wheel here. The more you turn the wheel up, the greater the modulation depth. But to use it, you need to set the modulation source, or the shape of your modulation, and modulation routing, or what you want the mod wheel to modulate. So let's explore the modulation sources first. The first option is bend. Bend is just a constant DC voltage of about 2.5 volts. This lets you use the mod wheel as a pitch bend wheel and gives an approximate 2.5 octave bend range, but only in the up direction. Another modulation source is the noise generator. There's a square wave. And the rate of the square wave is controlled by an LFO and set with the rate pot here on the left. It ranges from very slow to about 30 Hertz. There's also triangle wave. Skipping over sample and hold auto for now, we come to sample and hold keyboard. The sample source is the noise generator, and the sample rate is the LFO. So this is essentially a stepping random voltage generator. The one we skipped over is sample and hold auto. And when the switch is in this position, the keyboard's no longer used for triggering the contour generator. Now let's look at the modulation routing options. We've had it set to modulate the oscillator, but we can also have it modulate the filter cutoff frequency. or we can have it modulate both the filter and the oscillator. We can also modulate the wave shape. So here I've got a square wave, and we'll turn this to wave shape modulation. And for those who have been trying to cut back on their mod wheel addictions, there's not one but two off positions for this switch. So regardless of what you do with your mod wheel, there won't be any modulation. I'm not sure which of the two is more off than the other. The Micromoog has the Moog ribbon controller like you find on other fine Moogs such as the Polymoog and the Liberation. This is a positional sensor that's used to bend the pitch up or down. If you touch it in the middle, the pitch stays about the same. But the further up you touch, the higher the pitch gets. And the lower you touch, the lower the pitch gets. And you can rub it all sorts of ways to get what you're looking for out of it. On this one, I even put a new smooth coating, so its new owner can enjoy many long hours and late nights with their ribbon controller. And that's the Micromoog. If you've got a Micromoog, hopefully this video explains something new that helps you get the most out of it. And for everyone else, hopefully you found this an interesting look at the Micromoog's capabilities. I'm Synthchaser from Synthchaser.com. Thanks for watching, and have a great day.